And good morning, everyone. We often talk about belonging as something that we feel, but it's also something that is nurtured, taught, and created together as a community. And education plays a huge part in that. How AAPI history is preserved and taught has a profound impact in how we see ourselves and how others define us. And today I'm so honored with our panelists who are trailblazers in driving this conversation and attacking this problem in their own ways. To my left, Kathy Hirata is an attorney and civic leader and this year's honoree for her decades of impact across law, public service, and community advocacy. She retired in 2024 from Proval Boring, where she was a member of the healthcare and litigation group, and she currently serves as acting chair of the New York City Commission to Combat Police Corruption. She currently holds leadership roles at Pembroke Health, the Medicare Rights Center, and Fordham Law Center on Asian American Law. Cindy Tsai is the interim president and general counsel of a Committee of 100, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the full participation of Chinese Americans in all aspects of American life. And Jenny is a bilingual coach and interdisciplinary artist who integrates neuroscience, art, and Eastern philosophy to guide individuals toward deeper awareness and transformation, and supports a diverse and global community through workshops and sessions. So before we jump into the questions, I want to give the floor to our panelists to provide a short view of some of the initiatives that they're working on. Kathy?
Thanks, Ivy. And thank you all for joining us this morning. For my introduction, I just wanted to introduce all of you to the trial reenactments that our team at the Asian American Bar Association of New York has been developing for more than 15 years now. We take transcripts of court proceedings, the decisions rendered, newspaper articles, and other contemporaneous documents, and we create a 1 hour play backed up by a slideshow of historic photos to bring the case to life. Behind me should be some of the reenactments we have done, maybe not yet. We do have some slides showing some of the reenactments. Usually we prepare one play a year for presentation first at the annual convention of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. After that initial performance, the script and the slideshow are made available on the AAPI website. Sometimes our entire team participates in a repeat performance, but often my husband and I are asked to join as narrators 1 and 2 and help a group stage their own performance. If we have the slides, no, I guess we do not. We've been to New Orleans, we've been to Switzerland, we often perform with law school students at their law schools. We have done the Korematsu reenactment up at Harvard with Karen Korematsu, Fred's daughter, playing herself. We have also tried to expand to a younger audience and to non-legal audiences. We've performed reenactments at the New York Historical Society, and currently one of our reenactments, again, Fred Korematsu reenactment, is being used as a teaching tool at a high school in New Jersey. And we're looking forward to seeing the high school students perform themselves at Verizon headquarters in Basking Ridge, New Jersey next week. So the reenactments are a great teaching tool and they are available. Yes, and here are some of the slides. That slide right there, that is us up at Harvard performing the Fred Korematsu reenactment. And the lady in red is Karen, who was kind enough to come with us and play herself. Another one of these slides is at Georgetown, where we did our reenactment with a group of law school professors and students. And if you go to the next slide, this is the New Jersey class learning about the Korematsu case. And we've also done the Heart Mountain reenactment on a college campus. That's Princeton University. And for the final slide, that is our current team of reenactors. And if you look at the QR code, that will take you to the Albany website where anybody can borrow the scripts and also the slides. So that's what we've been doing for the past 17 years, actually. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Cindy?
Thank you. And thank you, Ivy, Serica, for inviting me to speak today. And I just have to say that it's such an honor to be sitting next to Kathy and this reenactment. Really, when I was going up through law school and had the opportunity to observe some of these reenactments, I was learning about things that I didn't learn in my law school. So there is such a important educational component on this work, and I really do encourage everyone to look at those scripts. So at Committee of 100, what we do is provide two available resources to all, whether it's parents, educators, community leaders who are interested in learning more about AAPI history and how to get it into schools. So there's two essential tools. One is we believe that you don't need a standalone bill, AAPI history bill. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. To really get it into the schools. There are ethnic studies bills. There are other tools available, curriculum standards, that you can go into your school and say, well, here is a piece of legislation that allows the teachers to teach AAPI history. So we have this interactive map where you could click on each state and it shows the different resources that, you could log in with the standard. And so there's a QR code here that will lead you into there, and you can filter through by your state. The second tool that we provide for everyone is just lesson plans. And what we have done is converted 5 lesson plans talking about Chinese Americans and their contribution to American history. And these are free lesson plans available on our website for teachers. We work with the Asian American Education Project to put together these plans, and there are activities, there are worksheets. So it's something that it's easy for the teachers to adapt. What we have started doing is we're close to the end of the year. The teachers are a little bit tired, and so we are working with our next generation leaders group to say, okay, if you want us to come in for a day to teach, we will do that. And so, as parents, or if you have connections to schools, especially in New York, and you want to get in, just offer our services. So you can email us at c100@committee100.org. Right now, as we speak, we have a team at PS 244 in Queens. So they're currently teaching a bunch of third graders about Chinese American history. So this is the work that we do. There's so much work. We really can educate Americans about AAPI history from all levels. So please use the reenactment, use the lesson plans. There's so much more great resources out there as well.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And Jenny, so you have a really interesting approach to teaching and education. Love to hear you share a little about that.
Thank you for sharing, Catherine. So I'm probably on the more of a practical life-like side of all this of education. But so I'm Jenny Huang, and I'm the creator of ArtSith. I work at the intersection of neuroscience, healing, emotional healing, and art. So for many years now, I've worked with Chinese and Asian American families, especially those navigating the what I call the invisible curriculum. So your emotional, cultural lessons that are communicated passed silently between generations. So a lot of times what we identify as education issues are actually emotional and identity ruptures. So a child that is struggling with motivation, focus, are actually caught in a web of untold stories, cultural tension, emotional silence. And so a lot of our AAPI youths are actually caught between two worlds. So at home, they're taught obedience, sacrifice, endurance. But outside, they are expected to express, to individuate, to to belong. but no one shows them how to hold both. And so they carry the pressure, the emotional pressure, but they lack the emotional language. They're ambitious, and they have visions, but they don't have a mirror to tell them where they come from. And so when these stories are missing from our families and from our classrooms, um, we are actually, there's a disrupt. And so when these stories are missing, what our children and the young people are doing is they are mistaking the lack of story for lack of worth. And so especially in these past 5 years, during COVID and after COVID, we see a surge in a lot of mental health issues. And so I've concluded to create what I call Art Zen, and it is to offer creative and playful tools that is grounded in neuroscience, to help families reconnect, to regulate, and to reprogram the nervous system. So from survival to belonging. Because education isn't just about facts, right? It's about identity, and identity begins with stories.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I guess I want to pose a question to both Kathy and Cindy, kind of talking about AAPI history. Why is it so important for it to be part of the mainstream curriculum instead of a standalone ethnic studies? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Kathy?
Um, well, I mean, it's so important to understand that AAPI history is a part of American history. If you study these cases, you learn that Asian Americans have been integral to so many important civil rights cases in this country. Were it not for some of these very courageous litigants, a lot of the principles that we hold dear these days, that have been the real touchstone for all sorts of civil rights actions, were because of Asian Americans who stood up for their rights, found lawyers at a time when Asian Americans couldn't be lawyers, and went to court. And learning that story and integrating that into American history is important, not just for AAPI children who can achieve some pride in what their ancestors have done and change the image of the shy and retiring passive Asian American into a vision of what Asian Americans have accomplished in the past, but it's also important to the non-Asian American kids who would learn something about their peers. And that's important because these days we're not talking to each other. I mean, that's one of the issues in this country nowadays is that we're siloed, we're not talking to each other. And if you get education that reflects the full sweep of history, the history of all the minority groups that have made this country great, I think that can make a difference.
I really don't have too much more to add to that, other than the integration part. We can show that we have that 200 years of contribution, loyalty, being in this country, and that can help break down the perpetual foreigner stereotype.
And how is C100 kind of advocating and doing a lot of the work in the advocacy? Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. So a lot of it is what I shared earlier about just being boots on the ground and getting in there. I think there's a lot of great organizations like Make Us Visible who are actively lobbying for legislation for standalone bills, and we will support those. But in the meantime, because once a bill is passed, there is so much bureaucracy that's involved as well, like getting a budget and training the teachers, et cetera. So that from the moment the bill is passed to it actually having impact in the classroom, it does take some time. So in the meantime, we're saying to all of the people who are saying we want AAPI in our school, here are some tools that we can give to you, resources, so that you can get into 1, 2, 3 schools. Every little person, every person going in and advocating for it is important and makes an impact. So we just want to give resources and tools that is like easily accessible for everybody.
And Jenny, you work a lot with kind of on that generational gap, right? With the past generation and often immigrant families navigating this identity issues. And what's been taught in school actually has effect on how they feel about themselves. What are some of the things that you're seeing just working with some of these next gen and the families?
I think it's lack of communication, and I think lack of, especially in our culture, I think lack of storytelling. For some reason, I think we're taught to be humble, and whatever we survived, we try to not not to not overemphasize because you try to humble, and what that does is a lot of parents I think don't say enough of their stories, and what that does is it creates that vacuum, and that vacuum then brews the shame that they internalize. And so I think what we should do is to, and it doesn't just take the family, I think, and also in the classrooms, and even like what you're all doing, just it takes the greater system, right? Because that's how our brain learns, because an environment has constant and so much effect on what we do. Because a lot of times we like emphasize personality, but actually the environment has greater effect.
And Kathy, the reenactments are actually all about that storytelling of the past, of a lot of the anti-Asian violence and exclusion. Why is it so important right now at this moment to do that, continue to do that? And what are some of the stories that you've heard from the people who've watched the reenactments?
I mean, one thing that Jenny said reminded me of something that happened with Karen Korematsu, the lady in red in the picture. She had never heard the story of her father's case until she was in high school class. And they discussed the case, and one of her classmates said, "Is that your daddy?" And she didn't know. She went home and asked him. And yes, and he had never told her about it because he was ashamed. That was the attitude of many Japanese Americans who went through the concentration camp experience. I am Japanese American. My parents never talked to me about it. My father would always talk about the fighting for 42nd, the heroic version of the Japanese American. He would never talk about the experience of the concentration camps. Luckily, his family had lived on the East Coast, and not as many people from the East Coast ended up in concentration camps as those on the West. But to get back to your question, sorry, if you could repeat it.
Yes, because the reenactment, other storytelling, right? So how is it like for some of the people who watched it? I mean, for Karen, that was her experience. What are some of the other stories that you could share with us? And maybe a little also elaborate on what the Korematsu case was about.
Okay. Well, we had actually gotten ready to sort of hang up our shoes by the time Karen Korematsu sat next to me at dinner and said, "Won't you please do a reenactment about my daddy?" And since then, we've continued doing them, including one about anti-Asian violence, which we did primarily because of what was happening in this country. And it's important to look back at those old stories. People aren't aware that the largest mass lynching in U.S. history was not down south, it was out west. When in 1871, I think it is the L.A. massacre, when 18, 19 Chinese men were gunned down or hanged by a mob. And people aren't aware that this kind of thing has happened repeatedly across U.S. history, and people need to understand that. And whenever we do a reenactment, people will come up to us afterwards and thank us because, one, they've never heard the story before, but also because it reawakens memories. Sometimes some of these people had a relative who was in a concentration camp, and it's not something they had thought about for many years. One of my partners at Cadwallader, his mother had been in a concentration camp, and until he saw our Hartman reenactment, he had not talked about it to anyone. So, bringing these stories to life matters in a big way for getting people to understand their history. And if you don't understand history, you may repeat it.
It's so fascinating how all three of you had this kind of different ways of expressing storytelling and how we learn through be educated ourselves about past history and to try to really prevent that from happening again. And to Kathy and Cindy and to Jenny, many argue that integrating AAPI history is a form of reparation. And do you see curriculum as a tool for justice? And how do you speak to the skeptics who see it as just niche or identity politics?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that for a little bit, and I don't necessarily see it as a tool for justice, but as a tool for healing and identity, right? So for us, learning about our place in American history will help, to Jenny's point earlier, the next generation seeing themselves as part of this country and that we've been loyal. And so that to me is more about a healing identity, and recognizing the trauma of our ancestors and the work that they've put in to allow us to be in this space. But whether that's justice, I don't quite see it that way.
I've never thought of it as reparation. There has been reparation paid to some of the survivors of concentration camps, but education is something different. As you say, I mean, it should be healing, right? I don't want it to be seen as payback for evils that you did once upon a time. We all need to learn together, and one of the ways to do that is through education and storytelling.
Yeah, I think I want to add on to that, in that I think in storytelling, in the classroom and education, it's talking about the story, so where we come from. But I think it's also very, very important to talk about where we're going. Because I think just telling, just talking about kind of what Maria was saying, like you're talking about all the things that are the challenges gets depressing, because then our kids also gets like ashamed, they get stuck. So I think what really works is, so I run these identities workshops, or like narrative identities. So you're talking about your past, you're also talking about where you want to go. So I want to think about like getting people to think about launching. So where you're at, you're always in a launch pad. So you know where you're from, and then you want to talk about where you're going, and especially cases that have happened successfully. So we talk a lot about the past history. We also want to talk about things that are possible.
I love that so much because as we all know that API youth mental health issues is also a topic, and from Jenny's perspective and from educating them on some of the issues, maybe it's a way to kind of to come to terms with some of that. Is that something that you're seeing, Jenny, in your work?
Yeah, so much. And it's just not in the US, it's everywhere. We're just at that cross section, and where the old system is going to have to come down. We're going to have to do something different. And unfortunately, I think this generation is caught right there. So we see I mean, in a world, we're talking about neuroscience, where, for example, where testosterone level is dropping 1% a year. So in like for 30 years, we're now getting a new generation of men that are not, doesn't have like your cowboy instinct, all the things that they were taught to be, which is a lot of times not even human. So in that world, not to mention the device that's changing our brains. So yes, definitely, we need to embark kind of on that journey to heal and to change.
I do think there is need to learn different things given that we are living a different reality with social media, with AI, with all the things that's happening. So I would love to kind of hear from Cindy. So what are some of the things that are in the curriculum, some of the specific topics taught that will be, some of it will be really interesting and meaningful for the AAPI youth, but also some of the other topics that might be really interesting for non-AAPI youth.
Yeah, so the way we framed it is based on sectors in different areas, right? So we have a lesson plan about science and technology, and so we feature Chinese Americans who have invented or were huge contributors in that field. We have one on arts and food and cuisine. I think that's usually like the easier launching pad because everybody loves food, right? And entertainment and stuff like that. But so, and then we have business, entrepreneurship, and the whole point of doing it in this way is to show we've been in all parts of America, right? We're not just Zen people. We're not just, great Chinese restaurants. Like we are in films, we are in, businesses, we are in engineers, we are teachers, educators, etc. And so that's how we've kind of structured our lesson plans.
And for Kathy, so your focus is on legal history and teaching legal history. What is kind of the role of a lot of the Asian Americans in kind of this long arc of legal history? What are some of the roles they played in? What are some like really impactful and memorable reenactment and cases you've worked on? Because you and your husband, Judge Chin, you guys work on these, you write these reenactment, these kind of like almost were you guys theater kids? I've always wondered because it's also these very theatrical replay of these very hard content, but kind of done in a way that is all about the storytelling and digestible for a mass audience.
I mean, there are some iconic cases that clearly we had to do. There are some cases that I had never heard of, but we at this point get suggestions from all over, from people who are aware of certain obscure cases where there are Asian American litigants or Asian American lawyers or an Asian American judge that turned out to be very important, usually for constitutional law issues. We did one recently about marriage equality. And it was because the Napava Convention was going to take place in a state that was somewhat hostile to the LGBTQ community. So we decided to do a reenactment that would focus on that particular minority because it turned out that one of the most important cases in the long line of cases leading to marriage equality was a case that took place in Hawaii involving Asian American litigants, an Asian American attorney, and an Asian American judge. So it comes from all sorts of different angles, but we're trying to tell stories that will resonate in the future. And these issues come up again and again, whether it's immigration or the concentration camps. The fear is these things can happen again. And if you learn more about what happened, a century ago or maybe only 50 years ago, you'll be better armed to deal with it.
And for each one of you, what are some of the things that, if you could just ensure every young person in America could learn about AAPI history, what would that be? Maybe two, one or two. I will start with Jenny.
To learn what
AAPI is like one aspect of it or one example or.
Well, I'll talk about what I think the takeaway should be. I'm always liking to kind of look forward, to what the possibilities are. And I would say that to remember not to just go over history, but also to definitely think about that we are not just a side note, that we are an important thread that is part of this American life, and that we can definitely make a difference, to make big changes. So to kind of think that way, like the launching direction.
For me, I think it's to emphasize that we are a lot more similar than we are different. That the feelings of, especially if it's American youth, the feelings of insecurity or, just growing up and trying to develop who you want to be as a person, like that transcends regardless of race or ethnicity. And so that Asian Americans also have that, process that they go through in life as well. And so that we're not foreign just because we look different doesn't mean inside we're different.
I think that would be what would be most important for me for young Asian Americans to learn is how proud they can be of what their ancestors did in this country. Sometimes people talk about the railroad workers, but because I'm a lawyer, because I've looked at so many of these cases, to me it was eye-opening that so many of these important civil rights cases were brought by Asian Americans. And for something like the Fred Korematsu case, when his case was initially taken up and argued to the Supreme Court by very good white lawyers. But by the time the Quorum Nobis case came up, which was the opportunity to get Fred's conviction overturned, a new generation of lawyers had come up, and they were Japanese Americans. And they were determined to undo the wrong that they felt had been done to their parents. And so the Korematsu reenactment we have is really two stories. Fred's story, and then the generation that followed that were able to get his record cleared in an American court. And the best reenactment experience I can remember is when we did a reenactment as a plenary session in front of the entire convention, and we brought back the lawyer who had argued for the Quorum Nobis team, Dale Manami, who's probably 80 years old by now. We brought back the judge who ruled from the bench in Fred's favor, who was retired and had to get up on the stage with her cane. And we brought back other members of the Quorum Nobis team and Karen, of course, and they were able to stand up on stage and get the thunderous applause of all these Asian American lawyers because of the levels of story there. That kind of pride, I want young Asian Americans to have. And for other Americans to see that side of what Asian Americans can do, I think that's important too.
Can I also add, like those cases, in addition to pride, I also think that it should tell us like to be courageous, right? Like it's hard to be a plaintiff because you're seen under a microscope and we're kind of like, okay, let's just put our head down, etc. Our ancestors were not head down people, okay? Like this is what American, mainstream America has kind of instilled. We were not head down people. We were courageous people who fought for rights. And there's like an entire American history includes Chinese Americans fighting for the rights that we know today. And so as our rights, there is more legislation than those that seems to be attacking civil rights and liberties. We should not shy away and put our head down. We should be proud Americans standing up and fighting and filing lawsuits and all that stuff.
Fred always said, speak up for what's right. And you got to do that.
Wow. Wow. Um, what an identity shift in learning just about the past history. That's not how like the shy Asian American kind of identity has just been completely shifted just in the span of our conversation. I want to end the panel discussion with something that is hopeful. So, if in the perfect world in which we have Asian American and API history integrated as part of U.S. American history, and everybody is learning about these things and watching these reenactments and really kind of learning from the past and as a way to go forward, what do you think would be what kind of opportunity would be possible for our AAPI youth and the next gen that's not currently possible?
I don't like the framing of that question because there is nothing impossible right now.
I love that. I love that.
But I do think it does open doors. You're breaking down the stereotypes. You're getting rid of the perpetual foreigner. You're being seen as loyal, which is something that we as Asian Americans right now are totally fighting, right? So there's a TAF status survey that went out that was published recently that said 40% of Americans think that Asian Americans are more loyal to their heritage country than America, and they don't take into account, whether we're fifth, sixth, seventh, 100 generations. So there is really a lot of work we have to do in that space.
Yeah, anything's possible, and will be even more possible and reachable if our youth are aware of these stories. We've tried to do reenactments that hit every aspect of the Asian American experience. We don't just do stories about Japanese Americans or Chinese Americans. We've done stories about Filipino Americans that have been done repeatedly. So Asian Americans are a huge group of people. And one of the things that we try to teach in these reenactments is the stories for all of them, so that anybody that's out there who is an Asian American will get a taste of the story of their own ancestors, and that's important.
So I think a lot of our youth and even ourselves are in chronic vigilance. So I think all the storytelling, the cases that you're showing are actual, that you can actually visualize, because seeing and all the senses is so important. I think to avoid this narrative vacuum is going to be very important. So inserting knowing the history, and then to really internalize and to avoid that chronic vigilance, to go from kind of survival to safety, and then on to more awareness, so more internal work, so that we can have harvest more power within ourselves and our children to move forward. And I think I just want to add one last thing is for me is to do all this with creativity and play. Because I find in my workshops, when I take out play, the element, it doesn't matter, young entrepreneurs, little children, 5, 6 years old, 70 years old, I bring in the element of play and creativity, walls come down.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I guess this panel is about that power. Asian Americans have always been part of America's history. Our history is layered, powerful, and deeply American. And I think this is also a discussion about how education, in the broadest sense, can shape that future that truly inspires us all. And I've been very inspired by our panelists. So thank you so much for your time. Another round of applause for our panelists.